Welcome everybody to the Piergrossi podcast. That's me. Really excited to have Christian de la Huerta with us today. Good to see you, Christian. Christian's in you're in Coconut Grove right now, right?
Coconut Grove, Florida.
So we're actually close by each other. He's in Coconut Grove, and I'm in Aventura. I'm noticing the lighting is a little bit rough on me, but as long as you can hear me and you can hear him, that's what's most important for this conversation. Yeah, let's start with let's actually first start. I get so excited sometimes I forget that some people don't know who the person is, and it's interesting because you like a lot of guests I have, you're someone that you have your hands in a lot of different interesting areas. I think they're all kind of integrated and they connect with each other. But when someone says like, what do you do or who are you? Like, how do you answer that question?
Well, I think here's the way that I tie everything together. Um, what drives everything that I do is paraphrasing Einstein, um, who says that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about the state of the world and the state of humanity and how we possibly dig ourselves out of this hole that we have dug ourselves into collectively, the only thing that I land on is a leap in consciousness, like that we're not going to solve it from the same level that we're stuck in now, and with a state of being of separation and othering each other, and the kind of relationship that we have with the planet and with the universe. So from that context, then everything that I do is supporting that awakening, that spiritual revolution, that's going to give us a different vantage point from which we can see the state of where we are.
Mm.
So from that perspective, I do, the rest is details, right? I do weekend retreats, I do virtual coaching programs. When we're able to travel, I take people on adventures, spiritual adventures, to spiritually inspired settings all over the world. I do breath work. Um, all of it driven towards that same goal, which is to continue waking ourselves up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally relate to that and resonate with that. And you are based in Miami, based in Coconut Grove, and you've been there for how many years now?
I went to high school here, so my family's always been here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not always, but since we emigrated from Cuba, I spent time in Hawaii. I spent 20 years in California and in the Bay Area. Came back, I think it's getting close to 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember talking to you when you first came to Miami, and I remember like there was some kind of resistance about leaving. You were really happy in Northern California and really feeling good there. Like it's a resistance, but it seems like it seems like you're enjoying it and you're appreciating it. You found Miami is such a. I'm taking my partner Annie here for the first time. She's never been to Miami, and I was telling her like there's nowhere else like it in the world. It's a unique place. It's just such a if you like it or don't like it, but it's very, very special. It's such a
Yeah.
unique. So, what is it like to be here, to be living here, and is there a way that it's kind of blessed you in some way, or it's been interesting in your growth and your expansion in some way?
You know, I love Northern California, and in many
Mm.
ways, that's so much more compatible with
Yeah.
with with my spiritual essence. And I had no intention to move back. Um, I was kind of tricked by the universe to come back to Miami. And at the same time that I always knew that I could see the wisdom of it, right? There's definitely more need for me and what I do here than there is in California. Um, so I could always see the wisdom of that. And the first 6 months I was down here, I was like, oh my God, what the F? What have I done? It felt like a spiritual desert. But then, I found an oasis here, an oasis there. And I think that was part of the guidance, was to come down here and create some spiritual community, connect with other teachers and healers down here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and it is a blessing. I mean, Miami, especially now when it's cold everywhere else, Miami is such a blessing. Um, the weather down here is such a blessing. And the fact that we can go to restaurants because you can sit outdoors year round, where in so many other places in this country you can't. Um, and it's got the combination of the ocean and part of Miami where I live, there's a lot of greenery. You don't see that in all parts of Miami. But the Grove is the oldest part of Miami. It was the old hippie hangout. It's kind of, so it still has this bohemian
Hmm.
kind of energy to it.
Get those beautiful big old trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And peacocks everywhere.
And peacocks. Yeah, I just saw an iguana actually right before we started the podcast.
Yeah,
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 I was outside there, just came strolling by. There's a lot of, I've been appreciating in some new way, because we've been to some more kind of more open, like, would you say, like less urban parts of Florida on this trip. So I've actually been appreciating the animal life and the wildlife here in these new ways, and yeah, it's a really, like I said, I find it a really unique part of the world. um you have a real diversity of eccentric characters down
yeah,
here. I appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. And it really is a gateway to South America. Like you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
literally live down here and not speak English.
yep.
Of course, most people do, but you can get past. You can survive not speaking English down here.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
so you have a new book out, um and the book is, well, you can tell me what the book is about, but I know it because I was a part of your online platform. You were sharing about it, and I was able to read, go through it and read it and have a review on the book. But it's really about being a hero and how to be a hero during these times, right?
Yeah, it's the first of a series which is titled
Hmm.
"Calling All Heroes." So it's a
Hmm.
call to action. What
Hmm.
does it mean to live heroically in the 21st century?
Hmm.
And it's coming from a place that the planet's going to be fine. It might take a
Right,
few million years, but life
right,
will continue in some form. Maybe it's
right,
an enlightened, conscious iguana planet when we're all
right,
done with it.
right.
Whether we make it home, interesting. We're just now beginning to witness whatever we have unleashed on the environment, which I think, by the way, COVID is a symptom of that, of our relationship to nature. Um, so this book is particularly on personal empowerment. So how does a hero um, step into power in a way that's not about hierarchy, control, fear, force, domination, that it's not power over, that doesn't require for me to push anybody down, step on them, put my knee on their neck in order for me to prop myself up and feel powerful. How do we do it in a different way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, what I feel in you, and I'd like you to just kind of tell me if this feels accurate for you. What I feel in you, and what I feel is like so valuable for these times that we're in, is I feel you as sort of like an integrative thinker, or like, did you ever delve into like Ken Wilber's
Mhm.
stuff? Yeah, like I kind of feel like you'll kind of like take the different sides of something and like kind of feel the value in all the sides, and then kind of put together something that kind of touches on the values of these things. And I say that to say that that feels really valuable, extremely valuable in this time that we're in, because for whatever reasons we can explore that, it's very divisive right now. And
Yeah.
you want to say something?
Yeah, and it's gotta be that way. It's gotta be body, mind, spirit. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't just be stuck in the head with great ideas or great teachings. Um, like they have to be practical.
Mm-hmm.
And which is, one of the way that I structure the book is as practical as I can make it. So
Mm-hmm.
um, short chapters with integrative practices at the end. They could be, and they're simple. They don't take a whole lot of time, but they do take some self-reflection. Um, but they're designed to help us apply the teachings to our lives, to really integrate them into our lives, although so that they don't remain just conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about literally empowerment, not conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at all these patterns that we have where we give our power away,
Mm-hmm.
and why do we do that? Why do we have such an ambivalent relationship to power where we want it but we're terrified of it? And then because we're so conditioned um, that power is a negative thing, with phrases like power corrupts,
Mm-hmm.
So then what good-hearted person wants to be corrupted?
Mm-hmm.
Combine that with the fact that, you know, we're also conditioned to be afraid of the emotions. So we fear rejection. We're terrified of conflict. We avoid confrontation. And so put all that stuff together into a mix, and what happens is we end up giving our power away,
Mm-hmm.
and settling for illusion of security, for a false sense of acceptance, and for morsels of pseudo love. And then we sell ourselves and our power so cheaply. And so so that's what the book is about, how to finding a different way to relate to power so that we can own it and express it in a way that is a match for us. Because what they forgot to tell us about that power corrupts is that that was intended specifically for a conversation about political power, not the interpersonal power that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I always find that I like to make a distinction between power and control.
Yeah.
So if you and we are friends, but let's say, we're hanging out or whatever, and I'm trying to control you, and I'm trying to, I'm actually not in a place of power. I'm in a fearful place of disempowerment, and I'm trying to control you to compensate for that, you know. So that's a lot of what we call power, which isn't really true power. And I think of power more what you're saying, or I think of Eckhart Tolle right now, the power of now, where you're just coming from a place of presence. You don't need to control another person. You're centered and grounded in yourself, and that sort of innate intelligence, that's the unique expression of you, can just come through in the moment. And it's a very different, even feeling, the tone of it, the feeling of it is very different than that kind of like, I have to control you and try, that kind of energy. It's a totally different thing.
Or controlling ourselves,
Or controlling
right?
ourselves. Very good point.
Like
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
we walk around
Yeah.
feeling like this is powerful,
Yeah.
like we're going to control everything, that especially guys,
Right.
we've labeled the emotions weakness. So we walk around just like, nope, you can't feel anything, and we're like, anticipating the next blow. We
Yeah.
live in DEFCON 1, waiting for the next attack. Sometimes we sneak in that first blow just in case, preemptively, but this is not freedom, this is not powerful, this is prison. So we walk around in self-made prisons. As what you're talking about is like when we let go of all that attempt to control what is ultimately uncontrollable, and we just open up and have this open relationship to life, that is way more powerful, because what we're doing in this pose is like we're saying to life, hey life, I got this. Like no matter what you throw my way, I know that I'm going to be okay. I know that I'm going to, that I'm going to land on my feet. I got this, which is a really much more fluid and vulnerable place to live. And yet that's where the power resides, not in this way of living, which is ultimately based in fear.
Mm-hmm. And a great avenue for working with that is the breath, right?
Yeah.
And I think you were one of the first people that ever was talking about the breath. Like, it's a lot more popular now. Wim Hof is out there, and a lot of I think a lot of people, it's in their conscious to some degree. At least people that are on the the holistic path, or they're on the conscious path. But yeah, you were one of the first people that you've been on it for a long time. So like, talk to us about the breath as an avenue to this place that we're talking about.
Yeah, Brian, it's all about the breath. It's at the core of every meditative practice. And yeah, there's a lot of attention to the breath. I think breath work is going to follow the trajectory of meditation and yoga. It's not there yet, but it's headed that way, in terms of large numbers of people knowing about it, and it's a very broad category. So there's a lot of breathing techniques. People, if you take in yoga classes, about pranayama and different breathing techniques that you use for different purposes. All of it really, really useful, by the way, in this time of COVID, and this time of the other dual, the other pandemic of I can't breathe, that oppression of systemic racism. The breath work that I've been practicing now for more than 30 years is a deeper and longer practice. So you do it for an hour and a half. It's really powerful. It can be really cathartic. And it's both profoundly healing. Like after my first session, I knew I had to do it again. And I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. My degree's in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist. And so I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. When I discovered breathwork after my first session, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly in so many levels, including, by the way, not only emotionally and mentally, but including physically. And I know that sounds too good to be true. To my more logical, skeptical scientific mind, that sounds crazy, even after 30 years of doing it. But I can't argue with results. It works. And it works with permanent results.
Yeah, like I said, you were one of the first people that brought it forward, and then my partner Annie was trained in a form of breath work, and we've been sharing, not so much the last year, but we've been sharing, let's say, over the last 3 or 4 years, breath work workshops, breath work at retreats, and can totally testify to everything you're saying, including the physical healings, back pain, headaches, just different ailments that people have. Like, oh, it's totally gone, and I don't, it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't happen from, oh, I'm going to try to make this thing go away, again, the control thing. But you just get into the breath, and you're essentially letting go through the breath, and then the body knows what to do when it's when you free it to do it.
That's exactly it.
So yeah.
That's exactly it. I think that's the best way to approach it, without expectations. You can have intention. If there's a
Hmm.
particular area of your life that you're being challenged or stretched by. I mean, there's so many stories. Here's my favorite story about physical healings. My teacher, the woman that I learned this from, when she did her first session, she was doing a one-on-one, and so she was lying on the floor doing her breathing, and behind her, the woman was sitting on a couch, and she heard her snap her fingers. For some reason, it triggered this memory when she was 5. She totally forgotten about it. And I forget why she got into some argument with her daddy, and she was got all in a huff, and she was going to run away from home, got on her little bike and started pedaling away and hit something on the sidewalk and fell over and broke her nose. It was black and blue for like 3 weeks. At the end of the session, she turned to the woman and she said, "Wow, how did you know to snap your fingers at that moment?" It was like incredible timing. It triggered this memory um, about what happened to me in relationship to my dad, and then I made all these connections about how that impacted my relationship with men throughout my life. And the woman's like, "I didn't snap my fingers." What they figured out as they kept on talking, what she'd heard was the cracking of the bone.
Mm.
The next morning, 40 years later, at 45, she got up and she looked in the mirror and was black and blue all over again. Not for 3 weeks, but for a couple of days while the body, healed itself and corrected itself. And like, how does that work? Just from breathing, but it goes to show about the interconnectedness of the emotional with the body, like we were talking about, the physical
Hmm.
body, mind, spirit connection, and how the body retains trauma and how it can heal itself.
Hmm. Yeah, there's like a, we think of these things as miracles, right? Or these are miracles, and it's like kind of like, sort of ties into the Einstein quote. It's like a miracle is like higher laws that we don't necessarily understand with our mind or our brain, and we don't need to understand. I think it's almost like that's the problem, is trying to understand everything with the mind. Everything, making everything rational, analytical, instead of just opening up to the moment, right? To the wonder of the moment, to the magic of the moment, to the miracle of the moment. And then these miracles, it reminds me of the Course in Miracles, like the book The Course in Miracles. It's like you open up to the moment, and life becomes miraculous, but it's not through you efforting or trying or controlling. um it's through being open to the miracle that's always been here. And I think that's a teaching that goes through all the great spiritual luminaries. They're all pointing to that truth. How do you connect with the Tao, so to speak, or God or spirit or source? And then that it's not that you, from the ego place, are creating these miracles, but the miracles are moving through you, which is important for us who are in the realm of healers to be humble in that way too, right? Of like, something's coming through, and we're a conduit for it. And it's kind of like a relationship between the healer and the healed that makes this miracle happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. There's
Yeah, go for it.
a lot of wisdom there. But yeah, like the Course in Miracles says, just a miracle is a shift in perception, like a shift in our thinking, and so connected to the ego. So that's why I spent probably the first quarter of the book speaking about the ego, because it is so critical to understand that part of the mind. Like, and there's so much confusion, as you know, in the world about what the ego is. And for most of us who know the word, we think arrogance, inflated sense of self, and it is that, but it's so much more than that. And so here's a great metaphor to capture it, because it addresses the way that you're talking about it. Is you put a baseball in the center of the stadium. That's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. So that's the importance of understanding the egos, so that we pop out of its limited worldview, which is all fear-based. And when we pop out of that, we step into another reality, in which miracles, in which magic, for lack of other words, are commonplace. It's almost like we step into a reality with different physics, with different laws. So everything becomes possible. And that's why no matter what retreats I do, what the themes are, whether it's relationships or personal empowerment or life purpose or whatever it is, there's two things I always do, that I always include. One is the breath work, because of what we're talking about, and it's how quickly it heals and how quickly it clears past trauma. The other is understanding the ego, because if we want to have the kind of relationship that we long for and deserve to have, or have a sense of personal empowerment, if we want to have lives that are filled with meaning and purpose, we have to know and understand the self-prison, the self-made prison of the ego, so that we can let ourselves out, because nobody else can.
Yeah. And it feels like the more you move into this path, you tap into more like divine synchronicity, right? Does that resonate for you? Like you just sort of like, the right person showing up, the right book showing up, you get the right, phone call at the right time. And when you can get in that space, I mean, everything just starts to flow. And of course you can fall out of that space, and then how do I get back into it? That's the thing. That's the thing that is part of this journey. But like, just as an example, I'm thinking of last night, I was at this event, and I've been trying to contact a friend of mine, and I wasn't, hearing from her. So then I'm at this dinner, and this guy says, "Can I sit next to you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. The seat's open." So we start talking, having a really nice connection, and he tells me that he lives in near Lake Worth, Florida, and then I say, "Oh, I remember my friend lives near there," and I say, do you know my friend?" And he looks at me like, he's like, "That's my housemate."
You can't make this shit up.
You can't. Like, it's just that's what happens when you're like in this state, and you learn not to doubt it. Like, you just know that, like, okay, I'm here for, I guess the fundamental thing is like to trust that what's happening is happening for a reason. Like, it's not mistake. Because the ego will be like, why the hell am I here? Or why did this person show up late? Or what, it's like, you want everything to go the way you want it to go. Because you think you know what's best. You think you know the best way it's supposed to go. And the mind does that. I still notice my mind doing that. But I just try to be very mindful of like, okay, that's the way the ego thinks it's supposed to be. But there is something higher if I can be open to it and be available to it. And I'll usually know what it is later. Like, I'll look back and say, oh, that's why it happened that way. Happened so much better, Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And divine synchronicity, sometimes I call it divine choreography. Because sometimes they're so complex, like I just can't imagine that happened by accident. Like,
yeah,
who came up with this stuff? All the elements and all the players that had to be put into place in order for something to happen and to congeal. It's like, it just blows the mind. And yeah, I think you also point to one of the fundamental differences between the baseball and the stadium. The ego has a fundamentally victim relationship to life, right? So it's like, woe is me, poor is me, what life did to me, what my mother or my father or or my ex-boss, or
Mm.
my ex-lover or partner, what society or sexism or racism or homophobia did to me. If it only wasn't for that, then I would be happy. But that relationship, it's basically disempowering, ultimately disempowering, because we're giving our power away to other people or other systems outside of us. So we're never going to be able to feel empowered when we come from that perspective. Whereas the other part of us, the stadium part of it, call it the soul, call it whatever you want. It has so it's the opposite of a paranoid relationship to like, oh, what life did to me, which you could say is paranoia. So it's the word that I love is pronoia. So it's the opposite of that, which means that we have not only a collaborative relationship with life and with the universe, but that the universe actually has a vested interest in each one of us breaking free. And when we think about, going back to the critical and the urgent nature of the time in which we live, when one of us makes a choice that's going to not only further our own process of healing and awakening and empowerment, but consequently all the countless lives that are going to be touched through us. Like the universe has no choice. The universe has a vested interest in each one of us breaking free and stepping into our power because of that urgency of the times.
So let's go back to that question. You threw a question out earlier. I think is a great question, which is why do we think power is bad for us, or we fear it, or we don't want it, or like what exactly is happening there?
Well, we've gotten confused, right? So we tend to think of power as, what I get into in the book is talk about how there's different types of power. So we tend to think of power, people who have power, as what? People who have money, famous people, people who are high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's a corporate ladder or some kind of religious hierarchy or whatever. But the thing about all those forms of expressions of power, they're outside of us.
Mm-hmm.
So they're fickle, right? They're here today, gone tomorrow. And that's one of the ways in which COVID is serving, one of the many ways in which COVID is serving, without minimizing the tragedy of it. But so many people whose identity was so connected to a job or a company that may not have made it. So it forces us to go inside and to connect with the deeper nature, with our deeper source of power, which is inside of us, right? Every one of us. And nobody can give it to us. Nobody can take it away. We can let it go and sell out on that power for all the reasons that what we're talking about, fear, rejection, or conflict, or all the reasons that we give our power away. But it's in there. And so the one kind of power, the worldly power, is it's kind of self-aggrandizing. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of blows itself up, kind of like a turkey in heat. Um, Whereas the other kind of power, the internal power, the spiritual power, soulful power, is humble. And it doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It just is, right? So think about, example I always give, a Gandhi or Gandalf, with their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet. You would never know how much power they hold until it's called for. And then watch out. Like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its most powerful global, expression, without ever shooting a gun or landing a punch. Talk about power. That's power. So how do we find a way to step into that kind of power, which is not about power over, right? It's power with. Because the one kind of power, worldly power, thinks that comes from the premise that there's a limited amount of it. So it's a zero-sum game. Your having power takes away from mine. But wait a minute, who said? Who said, right? Your power, if I come from a place like there's no limitation, why would your having power take away from mine? It's like, I know who I am, right? So I'm clear about what I want and what I don't want, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. I have clear boundaries in relationship to other humans and to life. It's like, why would I be threatened by anybody else having power? It's like I celebrate other people stepping into their power.
Yeah, this is interesting. I love where we're going here.
Mhm.
So let's explore the worldly power part a little bit more. So I think there's a question of like, we see the problems in the world, you know, we see different things and the suffering and all that's happening in the world, and there's a sense of, I want to make a positive impact. How to make a positive impact. That's the start of the hero's journey, I would think, right? That's okay. I want to do something about it. Then you have to become the hero. And so, um, can you have worldly power from a place of the true power, the authentic power from within? Like, can you? Because I think people have this idea of like, well, to make a positive impact, I need to move up the hierarchy to get in some position to be the CEO or to be the, you know, the prime minister or the president or whatever it is, and I can have a positive. I'll be reaching more people, or I need to be a celebrity, or, you know, in our field, it'd be like I need to sell, you know, millions of books, you know. So how do these things? What's the integration of this? Of like, I want to make a positive impact, but I don't want to have the corruption of power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Mhm.
And so it's not a black and white, binary
Mhm.
relationship between worldly power and spiritual power. There are times when worldly power is good to use, right? It's
Yeah, but I think
power in it.
that's an important point, Christian, because I think that in a lot of the spiritual people have this idea of like worldly power is bad, and, you know, that's not pure, and we need to like keep that away from us.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, we're standing in front of a room, right? If you're teaching in front of a room of 500 people, and the fire alarms go off, it's not a time to oh, love and light, people, you beautiful beings of love and light. How many of you think we should use that exit? Raise your hand. Beautiful, thank you, namaste. Now, how many of you think we should use that exit? Raise your hand. No, no, no. It's like, go. Right? We get directive, which we direct people.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of a way in which, it's not all one or the other. It's when we get into when the ego gets hooked into it, like power in itself is not good, or it's not bad. It's how we use it, how we give it expression. And it's when the ego gets into it and when it's trying to overcompensate for not feeling good enough, that it goes into these abuses of power and its need for control and its need to be right. That's when we get into trouble with power.
Mm-hmm. That need to be right is such a need to be right, or feeling that your perspective is the only one that's right. That feels like so important right now. Like, you know, that's what I want to explore that with you, because like, um, again, like there's such a divisive energy, it feels like, that's there right now, and like, um, how do we bridge that? Is it important to bridge that? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Like, what is your feeling on, like, you know, you said we're in a hole, we're in a deep hole right now. Like, what's your sense of the landscape? It's a big question, but kind of what's your sense of the landscape, and how do we move forward from it? How do we get out of it? And is there a way to kind of heal some of these divisions that are so present right now?
Yeah, man, isn't that the question? Um, because when I sometimes think about the state of the world, and the environmental crisis, like, oh my God, like, how are we going to reverse this? When I think about negotiating with a terrorist, or not even a terrorist, like a domestic, somebody on the other side of the political spectrum who doesn't even see me as human,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who see me as a demonic being, or
Mm-hmm.
like all this QAnon stuff now, where they see anybody who doesn't believe in what they believe is a pederast, and there's a global, it's like there's become so polarized and so extreme that sometimes I think, oh my God, how do we do this? It's like, I'm just going to go to the beach and eat a lot of dark chocolate and have a lot of sex. and then I think, all right, dude, chill out. I reel myself back. I said, all right, what can I do? Right. And what can I do to continue waking myself up and healing myself? And what can I do to help as many people do the same? Right. That I can do, right? One step at a time, one
Yeah.
step at a time, one soul at a time, one breath at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the question. Is like, how do we maintain our sense of our truth and our beliefs without that self-righteousness of the ego, right? Without pointing the finger, without making the other so wrong. because in especially in spiritual circles, where we talk so easy to talk about oneness and love and
Mm-hmm.
light and all
Mm-hmm.
those stuff. But if we are going to talk about that, then that means that Gandhi is in here, but so is Trump, and so is Hitler, and so is Mother Teresa and Princess Diana, right? So it's all in here if we're all interconnected. So that is one of the first steps, is stepping off that self-righteousness of the ego that appoints itself a judge, jury, and prosecutor, and knows so clearly what the other person, how they're wrong and what they did that was wrong, and sometimes takes responsibility for delivering the punishment that they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going for is just kind of taking ourselves out of that self-righteousness, and even sometimes just putting in the question mark of maybe, it's like, I can't even imagine me being that way or doing that, but maybe, if I had been raised by their parents and their parents before them in that culture and in that period of time, uh, maybe if I knew what was going on inside of their brain biochemistry, or there's any substance abuse, it's like maybe I might believe the same things or do the things that they did. Like, it doesn't make it right, it doesn't excuse it, but it begins to get us off that separate self-righteous stance.
Mm-hmm.
And it begins to open up the possibility for communication and even forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of an interesting example, actually, which you're directly um, connected to, and maybe this could be an example to speak to. Like, I've been kind of like getting immersed in like the Cuban American community in Miami and South Florida and stuff, and it feels like there's very different ways of like seeing things and looking at things, and some of that's from the trauma that was experienced in Cuba and things here. So I guess my question is just like can we see where someone else is coming from? Is that way maybe a gateway in, and maybe that's what you were kind of just pointing at, you know? And that's what I try to do. I try to, like, kind of what you were saying, like, put myself in someone's shoes. Can I see like what their perspectives? So for example, like, just a really common thing that I see right now is there's people that are really about individuality, respecting the individual sovereignty. It's very, very important to them. And people that are really about community. And that's like really important to them, is like community and looking out for everybody. And I look at it, I'm like, well, both are important, you know.
Yes.
Like, community without any individuality is terrible, and individuality without any community is terrible, so it's like a way of integrating. I find these poles are not really, they're both important. Usually if I look at whatever the issue is, I usually find there's some value in both sides, but the people are just holding that one side so strongly and they're not fully integrating the other side. And it seems like the way forward is the integration of both of those, which I think can happen with more conversation and more dialogue and more listening and more being open to hearing where people are coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And getting off the binary
Mm.
of,
Yeah.
black and white, and I'm right and you're wrong.
Mm.
And there's only one way, and that's my way,
Right.
which is all ego. It's all
Mm.
ego based.
Mhm.
And moving more into both, and right, like, you can have a sense of individuality and be concerned about the community.
Yeah, and I actually think it's essential. Like, it's like, it doesn't, community doesn't work without a sense of individuality, and individuality without community is like, we're communal creatures. We must have community. So yeah, I think that integration of the two is where it's at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is what prompting the thought, but wearing the whole controversy and the politicization about wearing the masks,
Mm-hmm.
which created a false dichotomy. And you're taking away my freedoms. It's like, how come we don't have that with wearing seatbelts?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the same thing, right? It's just a minor inconvenience, but it's for our protection and protecting all of us. And the Eastern cultures are much more into the communal thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to what we're talking about. If we really are going to talk about oneness, then it's like, that's really ultimately, I don't care how many vaccines we come up with, Like we have to get into like transcending all these superficial differences that keep us separate. Like the only way we're gonna really handle this virus or the next, it's global. Like we've got to think about it from a global perspective. We're all in this together, literally,
Hmm.
literally, not poetically, not in a new agey, airy fairy sort of way. We're literally all 7.5 billion of us, these tiny, tiny, tiny ants in this tiny pebble, hurtling through space at unimaginable speed, thousands of miles per hour. And we're at the point where we've got to think as one planet, and what happens in this country cannot be separated from what happens on the other side of the world.
Hmm. So thinking globally, and at the same time, like your book is talking about, like that personal empowerment aspect as well. So it's like the intersection of the two, that global perspective, which starts with me, the individual, and what can I do in my little, you know,
Yeah,
sphere around me, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and given your audience, I just want to take this opportunity since you brought it up again. If anybody watching this has the slightest suspicion that they have work to do as a teacher, as a healer, as an activist for change, as an activist for the awakening, as a catalyst for the awakening, for the spiritual revolution, whatever you want to call it, it's like this is it, right? This is the time that we have been waiting for. And unfortunately, we don't have the time for another certification, another training programs. Like do that if you want, but don't use that as an excuse for not stepping into your role as teacher or healers. It's all hands on deck now.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's the it's like where there's adversity, where there's challenge, that's where the opportunity is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
you have another book coming out spiritually. That was your first book, yeah?
yeah. That was my first book, which that's probably 20 years ago when that came out.
Yeah. Yeah. So um I guess like I wonder, like everything, kind of what I was just saying, like everything has its challenge, but it also has its opportunity, right?
Yeah,
So a lot of my friends are gay men. A lot of people on this podcast having gay men, and I just been thinking, not that's the first time I ever thought about it, but I think I actually remember Eckhart Tolle writing a little bit about this as well. That um, there people who have been, or groups of people, that there's been some marginalization, or there's been some sort of, some level of oppression. There is a gift you can find in that can sort of, if you can find that little pathway in it, and maybe you sort of you embrace whatever the lesson is, the challenge is for you, it can really be an accelerator of the evolution of your consciousness, awakening of your consciousness. That's something that you've found in yourself or other people that you've worked with.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and I write about that in Coming Out Spiritually. The because the what I did in that book is come up with 10 archetypes
Hmm.
that people that we today call LGBTQ
Hmm.
fulfill, and spiritual roles that we have fulfilled throughout history in all inhabited continents before we even had a name, for who we are. Yeah, because the word gay, it's not even a few decades old, and the word homosexuality wasn't even coined until the late 1800s. Um, but yet, we've been around, and interestingly, gravitated to roles of spiritual service and leadership. And the reason I wrote that book is because so many people in the LGBTQ community have shunned spirituality because we confuse it with religion. And no
Right.
wonder, right? Given
Right.
given the treatment that we have received and
Hmm.
continue to receive at the hands of most religions in this world. But what is tragic about that, like I'm saying, is that before the patriarchal times, before the days when the divine feminine was still honored, people that we call LGBTQ were honored and revered for these roles of spiritual service that we played all over the world. So the one that you're talking about is has to do with being the other, because the like many people, like not so much these days, but still, but growing up different, You grow up, thinking like I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me, trying to find a way to reconcile my spirituality and my sexuality in a religion that told me that I was going to burn to hell for eternity. Like, my adolescence was one long depression, with suicidal thoughts, right? As I tried to reconcile this part of me that wanted to serve, that had this longing to serve the divine as I understood it then. And so this so that's the shadow side of that. The benefit, the gift, the blessing of growing up feeling different, feeling like an outsider, is that it gives us the advantage. It gives us a perspective to of the outsider, which where you can see the forest and the trees. So that's one of the reasons why LGBTQ people have always been great chroniclers and observers of society, because we're in it, but not of it, and we cross all sorts of boundaries. We're found in all sorts of cultures, all over the world, and so yeah, so many. So in these 10 archetypes, they all have a shadow side and they all have their upside.
And I feel like you're really, a component of what you share with people is really about balancing masculine and feminine, balancing the masculine attributes and feminine attributes. And that again feels really important right now. I think that it's easy to kind of get caught up in one and sort of demonize the other polarity. But it feels like you really, you really strive to, within yourself, find the gifts in both these polarities and support other people to find the balance of both these polarities.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, because that actually connects both books. Mm-hmm. That's a common theme in both, because homophobia and misogyny are two sides of the same coin. If you look at the religions and the cultures that persecute gay people, 100% correlation, the ones where women are not equal, right? Well, the ones where women are oppressed.
Like a sort of a hatred for the feminine, or really, I would say even deeper, a fear of the feminine.
It's a fear of the feminine.
Yeah.
Because let's take Christianity. Let's take one of what the so-called holy text of terror. The 6 quotes biblical passages that are used to condemn or oppress homosexuality. So the one that says you shouldn't sleep with a man in the same way that you should with a woman. Like, they don't even say anything about 2 women, because women weren't even human then. Women were property, and even today, even with heterosexual homophobic men, like 2 women is like, ooh, sexy. Ooh, get off on that. 2 men together, gross, you got to kill them, right? or they're gross us out. And so what is that? What's up with that? And the more that I think about that, it's 2 women together are not a threat to the status quo. Uh-huh. 2 men together, and this is all subconscious, by the way, in their mind, one of them is willingly forfeiting the superior male status. And that is a threat to the status quo. And so yes, like in this book about power, it has a particular message for women. Like, that's one of its themes. Coming from my belief that the empowerment of women is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. To that, we can connect all the other issues. So when I think about it strategically, if I'm going to focus on one thing that's going to then impact many others, that's it. When women are in 50% of power, we'll have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and social injustice and how we treat the environment. So, and yet it's not about going back to a matriarchal system, right? We don't want to go back to an imbalance. We want to find that balance now. That's what's necessary. And it has to start here. If we expect to find that balance between the masculine and the feminine energies, which we all have, it has to start here. And one thing to add to that, by the way, is like, we have this misunderstanding of feminine energy, and we think that's weakness. It's like, wait a minute, you're talking about the power of creation. What is more powerful than that? And I'm not going to do her justice, but Betty White, the inimitable Betty White said something to the effect of, she was talking about why we tend to associate courage and strength with balls. Like, you gotta have balls. So she said, wait a minute, what's up with that? You just you thump those little things, and the guy's bent over in pain. You want to talk about power? Let's talk vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
Yeah, giving birth. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing to be able to do.
Seriously,
Yeah,
seriously.
yeah, yeah. Well, so we could say like, that takes some vagina. I like it.
Or
I
it
like
takes
it.
some ovaries.
But you, I remember you talking about the goddess temple,
Yeah,
right? Is that still something that's exists and is a
yeah.
place to be devoted to the feminine?
I'm sitting in it right now, and it's a
Fantastic.
house I rent,
Uh-huh.
and I treat it as a temple, and
Uh-huh.
it is a sacred temple, and it's alive. So it's not just like a dead temple. Like, you could feel the energy. People comment on that all the time. It honors all the traditions, but it has a particular dedication to the sacred feminine because we've been so out of balance
Mhm.
for too many thousands of years, and because the goddess was exiled.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's in my own little way of helping to facilitate that rebalancing.
Beautiful. And do you ever work with anybody that you find needs to integrate more the masculine attributes or the masculine gifts in themselves as well?
All the time,
Hmm.
all the time, and especially women,
Hmm.
but not only.
Hmm.
I do a retreat just for women in power. I do, one on personal empowerment for everybody, but I do one specifically for women in power. And what I'm discovering is that, like, especially in our community, in the spiritual community, as men are becoming more woke, for lack of another word, or beginning to realize that they don't want to be an expression of this toxic masculine system, they're still finding their way, right? And they think that it's all just then they go the other extreme into too much softness and too much flow, which are great qualities of the feminine, but there's also, the angularity, for lack of another word, the clarity, the penetrative energy of the masculine is also really necessary, and women long for that. So it's not about giving that up. It's just about finding ways of expressing it that are not power over,
Hmm.
right? That can create that space of holding in strength, in which the feminine can then feel free to just flourish and go off into that beautiful sacred dance of the feminine.
Beautiful. Yeah, I totally relate to that, resonate with that. I think that we can kind of, uh, a lot of people have had trauma with masculine energy. Um, and so then there can be this thing of kind of dismissing the entire half of the equation, you know, where there is something beautiful there to integrate, that can be a positive, uh, yeah, as positive gifts, just like the same with the feminine, you know.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
Healthy and the unhealthy expression of it.
yeah.
And so that's why I added a book on what it means to be a man in the 21st century, which I find it kind of ironic that it's a gay man writing it. But I love it, that it's a gay man writing about what it means to be a man in the 21st century. And part of what I do there is like redefine like some of the traditional male roles like the provider, which is such a strong identity for so many men. And that's one of the reasons why so many men are struggling in these times, and having to then look for ways of thinking that are more linear and that define everything, and that, the more patriarchal system, because they're feeling, as women are stepping more and more into their power. I think we're up to like 40% now of households, of heterosexual households in this country, in which women are outpacing, are out earning men. So men are having to like redefine, right? Like, wait a minute, That used to be what I do, but wait a minute, that's not the only way to provide, right? Which is just finance. This is just one way to provide. What about providing a stable home? What about being a rock in your home around which your partner, your spouse, your wife, your kids can flourish? It's like, wow, what a thing to provide.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like you're someone that has a really healthy integrated masculine energy, and several of my gay male friends, I would say they have a very healthy masculine integrated energy. So that's one of the misconceptions, I think, like even speaking for myself when I was kind of younger on my path, this idea that, oh, if you're gay, you're feminine, you're kind of more like, you act more like a woman or something. But that's another stereotype to break. It's not necessarily the case at all. I'm just more of a place of just of course the mind's always going to make these categories, but I think beyond that, if you can just embrace the mystery, of people, and embrace the wonder of people, and we have our categories, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what the mind does. That's appropriate for it to do, but not to get too caught in like, oh, you're gay, so you act like this. You're black, so you act like this. You're white, so you act like this. To kind of like be a little more loose with those things and be open to being surprised by
Yeah,
who
yeah.
people are and what they are.
Or you're a man and you have to act this way, or you're a
Yes,
woman and
absolutely,
you have
100%.
to act this
Yeah,
way. It's
yeah.
like yeah, let's just get over it and and that's part of the beauty. And that's, by the way, one of the gifts of people like me who had to struggle with existential questions of who am I
Uh-huh.
and what role do I play in this world at a very young age. One of the gifts of that is that we get to make up the rules, right? We learned earlier in life that we get to make up the rules because the whole thing is made up anyway.
Right.
So we get to define who we are, and we get to be playful about it. And the whole gender thing is a spectrum, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
and but what really needs to happen is the make wrong of the feminine, that the labeling the feminine as something less than or weakness, and because it isn't, obviously. And to find that way of balancing it. Um, and by the way, this is going back to Coming Out Spiritually, the book, one of the archetypes talks about how um, in many spiritual traditions, it's that balance between the masculine and the feminine, which is what we're going for, because the sacred is both, right? So the sacred balances both those energies, and if we are an expression of the sacred, then we too have that. And so, for example, we look at the yin yang in Taoism. It's a
Right.
perfect balance, and not a linear geometric balance, but a curvy balance, and is to highlight the point, to put a dot of one in the other, to say that we all have all those energies. And in Hinduism, which is there's a phrase that I don't even know how to pronounce, but because I've only read it, but it's like Pritiya Prataki, something like that. Which talks about how the more evolved we are spiritually, the more that we embody and exhibit the both the masculine and the feminine qualities. And even using Christianity again, but the mystical part of it, the Gnostic Gospels and the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is quoted as having said that not until we balance within ourselves the masculine and the feminine will we find the kingdom of God. And of course, the kingdom of God not being some mythical place that we go to when we die, but a state of being, a state of consciousness to which he never claimed exclusivity, in phrases like these and greater things you'll do.
Yeah, I think the feminine is like, it's a gateway to the mystical consciousness, right? It's like, I think one of the issues with the feminine, to me, issues meaning why people are challenged by it, is that our society, the Western world, it's so analytically based, so rationally based, so intellectually based, that if something can't be explained rationally, analytically, intellectually, then it's almost like it doesn't exist, or it's not valid, or it's not, so we have this thing, and this is where science is all this stuff again, I'm not like, I think it all has its place, but there's this aspect that's missing, which is more mysterious, which is more the mystical, which it's kind of trans rational is how I would describe it. It's not that
Mhm.
it's not rational, it's just it's beyond the
Yes,
rational, it's
I
beyond the
love that.
intellect, it's beyond analysis. You know, it's you have to feel it, it's intuitive, it's, you know, this is all the gift of the feminine. And I think that's what you're saying, like that's what our society's not really honoring, that component fully.
Exactly. And it's all in the brain, right? It's just like it's a balancing the left and the right sides of the brain as well.
Yeah, and that's where the creativity lies, right?
Exactly. And
So then,
intuition.
yeah, so then you start to see like, oh, that's why we just, you know, keep doing the same shit over and over, and the, you know, we have this establishment that's stuck and entrenched, and we're lacking that creativity to just, you know, flow from and express ourselves from.
Yeah, and yeah, because we have made reason, king
Mm-hmm.
or queen,
Mm-hmm.
whatever gender reason is. Um, and my father is a great example of that. Because he was a brilliant psychiatrist. I know because
Mm-hmm.
I often meet people who unsolicited will tell me, "Oh my, your dad was really good. He really helped me." But with his own emotions, he was clueless, like had no idea what he was feeling. And I inherited that, right? Because I didn't have a role model for that. Um, and so for me, it's been a lot of because that's also the realm of the feminine, right? The emotions that are scary
Mm-hmm.
because they're not rational. And you and I know that we've got to figure out the thing with our relationship to the emotions. We can't suppress them, right? What used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that everything is energy, including the body, including the emotions. Even though
Mm-hmm.
it might seem physical, like solid, it's not. And so what happens is when we make the emotions wrong and we try to suppress them and we try to deny them, two things can happen. Either we suppress, and then we react and cause harm to our relationships because we can't suppress that stuff anymore. Or we walk around with layers upon layers upon layers of emotional crap that then we're trying to have a relationship in the present, and all of it is getting filtered through this lifetime of unhealed trauma and suppressed
Yeah.
emotions. That's why our relationships, like, how do they stand a chance as long as we're doing that? Or we suppress, and that energy has to come out somewhere. So it starts showing up in physical symptoms, ulcers, heart attacks, cancer. It has to come out one way or another. And,
Yeah.
and that's part of this conversation we're having about balancing and not suppressing the feminine anymore.
Totally. Totally. And then for the masculine, it's like a healthy honoring between the polarities, between the yin and the yang, right? So I find like for the feminine to really be able to express all we're talking about, this intuitive energy and the feelings and the heart, um, there needs to be feeling of feeling safe, right, to be able to do that. So I think that's where a healthy masculine that honors the feminine can create a structure that doesn't feel oppressive but actually feels supportive. You
Exactly.
know, creating that stable structure. I think even like for the stuff you and I do, like if I'm doing a workshop, um, there needs to be some structure. There needs to be something there, but the structure is to support that flow of the intuition, of the feeling, of the emotion. So ideally, it goes together beautifully.
Exactly.
You know,
It's,
yeah,
it's
and
a
where
both
where we
and, not an either
right,
or.
yeah, and where we've kind of lost our way, you know, and I think it's changing a bit in the corporate world. You're more involved there than me, and I know you do some stuff there and stuff. But I know in the old way it was like you could not express feelings, and I think there's still a lot of work to be done there, right, in that realm. But feelings were not something that was like valuable or important. They're in the way. So the structure would basically kill the feminine, right, or squash the feminine or destroy. But we
Exactly.
can have masculine structures that actually honor and support the feminine, have that perfect balance, and I think that's ideally like what we want to have.
That's it. I
Yeah,
think that's what we're going for.
yeah, yeah. And I think you're like I said, like you're a good representation of someone that's, you know, striving to embody that in yourself and express the gifts of both within yourself in a really beautiful way. So appreciate your
Yeah,
presence.
thank you. And I
Great.
appreciate yours. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah. So how can people connect with you? What's the book Awakening to Soul of Power is out now. Where can they get it? Anything else that you're excited about happening that you want to share
Yeah,
with
they can
people?
get it anywhere where books are sold,
Yeah.
including Amazon.
Yeah.
They can find me at soulfulpower.com. And if they add a slash free guided meditation and get them on my email that list, then they'll get not only a free guided meditation on trust, which is also what we're talking about when we step into that realm of beyond the ego, and they get some other goodies over time. One thing that they may be interested in is a year-long coaching program that I've launched, started in January, and which I'm launching another group, another cohort in April. And of course, I'll go back to doing retreats whenever we can. They're amazing, life-changing, especially when, like you're talking about, when we can bring in more cognitive teachings, maybe more masculine with breath work, maybe the more feminine approach to it, and that beautiful balance between those two. But who knows, right? Hopefully, maybe late summer we'll be able to do that again and breathe together powerfully in the same room together. But in the meantime, what I'm loving about this year-long model is that I get to spread out the teachings over a whole year, right? So piecemeal and with interactivity. That's what's different. That's what I'm not able to do on a retreat. So little bite-sized pieces of teachings, content every week, with homework, with tasks, power practices to help integrate the teachings into our lives, which I think is going to be much more effective in the long run. Because what happens, a lot of people have a peak experience at a weekend retreat, and then they go back into their lives. And if they don't have a practice, if they're not paying attention and supporting that expansion, pretty soon the contraction happens, and the ego pulls us down with its boring voices of fear and self-doubt and self-questioning. And then they have to come to another breathwork session or another retreat or another session with you to go back to that expanded state. So that's what I'm loving about this model. It's bite-sized pieces and with the interactivity to support that continuous expansion and satisfaction guaranteed. Like I know without a doubt that if they do this program, which manageable, not a lot of stuff to do. Like I'm keeping it manageable, the content manageable with the practices. Like transformation is guaranteed after a year. There's no way that you could be the same if you follow the directions of the program.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll have a link to your site when this podcast comes out, and it's a real treat to be able to connect with you, Christian, and share the space together and share the wisdom with you together. And thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I know, like you and I could always talk for hours.
Yeah.
Just like bounce off each other. It's like, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It's like it's always a great conversation. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for everything you do and all the difference, the big difference that you're making in this world. Yeah.
Thank you, Christian.